You know, heading into this game, I did not want to call it a must win against the Wizards. I said this is a you better not lose game. And here we are. The Bucks messed around, found out, and caught arguably the worst loss of the season. We're going to break it down on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What it do, y'all? Welcome to Locked On Bucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network out here. Your team every day. I'm Camille Davis, an NBA analyst with the Locked On Network and the co-host of the Technical File podcast. Joining me is Frank Madden, longtime voice of the pod and the founder of brewhoop.com. And we truly do appreciate you for tuning in, even after losses like this one, and making Locked On Bucks that first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So head to FanDuel.com to get started. On today's show, same issues, different game for the Bucks. We're going to discuss how the same issues just continue to plague this team and if the Bucks have any on-roster solutions to these problems. Kevin Porter Jr. had a big game himself, but left in the fourth quarter with back spasm. So we'll let you know the latest on that injury. We heard from Doc and Kevin Porter Jr. after the game. But first, Frank, I just got a question for you just straight up. Was this the worst loss of the season for the Bucks? Because, I mean, like the Kings loss was like, dang, that feels like one you shouldn't have let slip away. The Sixers loss without Giannis was like, dang, you were right there. Could have won it. Heat and Knicks also felt in the same boat to me, kind of like the Sixers of like, it's a winnable game. You let it slip away. This game against the Wizards tonight, winnable for sure. But there were so many different lapses over the course of this game that had me just being like, okay, they just can't seem to put the Wizards away. They just can't seem to put the Wizards away. And then here you have it, a 3-point loss to the Wizards where, again, in addition to the turnover problems, in addition to the rebounding problems, in addition to the Wizards having more field goal attempts than the Bucks, a problem we've seen in other losses to the team, they had a chance to win it, and yet and still execution down the stretch just came up short. How do you feel about this loss? Was this the worst one of the season in your opinion?
I would say probably yes, because like they so clearly needed this one in a way that like, not that like losing at home to the Kings, the way they were playing, that was like a terrible loss. But like you were okay. You were like doing okay record wise. Like now it's like you just lost. Was it that 7 in a row? Sorry, Camille, I can't even like recall like how many like losses they'd thrown together. So you just lost 7 in a row, and then it takes like, whatever it was, an 18-point win over like literally a Nets team that isn't trying anyway and benched like didn't have half their team. Like you got cocky after that game, you win one game and then you go on the road and you look like teams can like, you can have games where, you just can't hit the broadside of a barn,
Right.
and the 3-point shot just isn't there and the other team just makes a ton of shots. That was the opposite of what happened in this game. And I think that's what really, and that's what I think really makes this such a like indictment of just the way this team is currently executing and the issues that they have ending possessions on defense and the possession math that we've talked about for over a year. We've talked about their math problem going back to last year. So much of this is just, the same crap that we've been hearing and seeing forever. And it just manifests it today in the kind of the most comical way possible, because you shoot 55% from the field or 55% from three. The Wizards didn't shoot that well from three. So how do you lose this game? And it's just like, you're just an unserious team, I think is what it comes down to, right? I mean, how many tip-ins, / wide open dump off passes did Marvin Bagley get tonight?
Season high for Marvin Bagley tonight.
Yeah. And, like the guy that is normally above reproach, Giannis, I mean, this is one of the worst kind of like effort games that I've seen from him. He was like, there was so many like half-assed defensive possessions from him, swiping at the ball, letting guys blow by him. And then, late in the game, he started to exert his will a bit. I think he got frustrated. I totally get it. He might have gotten frustrated early in the game with some of the lack of calls, and officiating kind of sucked in general. But the backbreaking play was I think they were up 1, and I forget the time left on the clock, but he gets Chris in the post and he settles for a Dirk step back, which, look, Giannis can hit those, but that is absolutely him getting too cute because he wants to hit a skill shot over Chris. And he completely short arms it. And then Chris kind of falls over him and Giannis like stays on the ground. And it was hard to see exactly kind of what happened, but like, I don't know, 10 seconds go by before he even gets into the picture. And by then I think Chris was the one that hit a trailer 3 that
sure was,
gave them the lead. And that was it. Like, this is the kind of like game, like the visibility of this loss, losing to a 2-win team, and the way that Giannis kind of carried himself defensively and the frustration that he seemed to have. I mean, this is what sparks like, the next Shams report or whatever random person wants to be like, oh, like teams are circling like Giannis. Does Giannis want out? Like, because this is, this is not like a Jimmy Butler game, in Miami or something like that. But like, this is as close as you'll find to Giannis just like having a, like, I don't want to be out there tonight type of effort, which is obviously not something that, you ever think of him doing. Again, I'm not going to say like, this is the first time we've ever seen him like half-assed on defense or just gamble a lot. Like, there have been more than a few games. Like, we love Giannis. His effort level is generally like great compared to anybody, but he's not a go 100% every possession guy. He can't be, but like tonight, it felt like this was a game that they took for granted, and Giannis took for granted, and they got burned, and in a very, very visible way. And, it really just like highlighted like that this team just kind of stinks right now. And they have to like do some soul searching, like this is a, like, have a players only type of meeting type of effort, right? Which, I think losses like the Miami game, or, where you don't have Giannis, or even, like the game in New York where you were competitive till the end with Giannis coming back. I mean, those are like, you can live with those. Yeah. But a game like this, like, a lot of reminded me, Camille, of like 2 years ago, they went into Washington and lost. Dame was out, but they lost a game where Giannis was really good, but they lost a game to the Wizards, who were terrible, of course, at the time. And that was the first of a 4-game losing streak. They went back the next night and lost at home to the Grizzlies, who had a ton of injuries. The difference is that team was 47-28 at the time. I think we remember that game that they lost in Memphis when the Grizzlies had like no players.
The CVS receipt game. Yes.
Yeah. The Cancun game before the All-Star game that year. But that team like actually still won a lot of games. This team is not winning games. And so like, they're like literally like, hey guys, you want to win some games so that you're at least in a play-in spot? Because like right now you're not even the play-in team. I don't think. No, so there's just 11. A lot there's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff that this team like needs to take a long look in the mirror about. And, it's coaching staff for sure. But it's also players. Like, the players aren't helping themselves to a large extent either. I think the coaching staff is leaving a lot to be desired, to say the least. But this is just a top to bottom kind of fail game.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the coaching and the players a little bit later too, because one thing that really like was disappointing, you mentioned like the energy. It felt like a game where the Bucks felt like we're going to be able to win this game because it's the Wizards, and they just did not put the effort out that they needed to. And I felt it early in the game, like in the first quarter, and I couldn't tell at that point, was it because it was just like no one in the building? So like there was naturally kind of like a deficit in energy in the building or if it was a Milwaukee Bucks thing where they just weren't playing the way they needed to. And as the game continued and the building started to come alive with the fans that did make the trip out there, I was like, okay, like this is a Milwaukee Bucks problem again. And as we mentioned, it's been the same issues, another different game. I want to dive a little bit deeper into the same issues the everydayers know at this point: the turnovers, the rebounding, the second chance points, the point of attack defense, breaking those down and starting to try to figure out how do the Bucks get better from this. So we'll talk about that right after this. But first, a word from our friends over at FanDuel, because NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. And that is what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds: every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver can get hot, or a defense can tighten up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. And FanDuel lets you jump in the moment. You got the live spreads and the money lines that adjust instantly. You got player props that update as guys heat up. And you can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, and every single possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. Thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports network out here. A special shout out to the everydayers as well who tune in Monday through Friday. Frank, I mentioned same issues, different game. I'm feeling like a broken record at this point during this season. And honestly, some of these issues are not new. We've had these problems last year. We've seen some of these problems the year before as well. The turnovers, the second chance points, poor point of attack defense, effort. And it wasn't even free throws tonight. Like, yes, there were times where I felt like the whistle was a little bit off. I'm like, hey, Giannis should probably be heading to the free throw line here. But the Bucks actually took more free throws in this game than did the Wizards. They shot 21 of them. The Wizards shot 15. Like, we don't see that too often for the Bucks. So it's like, in a game when free throws weren't even the issue, in a game where you shot 55% from three, 55% from the field, you lost because of turnovers. You lost because of rebounding, second chance points. You lost because of point of attack defense. Like, the Bucks had 17 turnovers in this game, led to 17 points for the Wizards. And the crazy thing is the Wizards only had 10 turnovers of their own, but it led to 18 Bucks points. So like the Bucks were able to score off Wizards turnovers. It's just like their own offensive flow was getting messed up with how many stoppages and turnovers they had themselves. Like, this was a Wizards team without Alex Sarr. The Bucks were still out rebounded by the Wizards, 42-35. The Wizards had 15 offensive rebounds and scored 20 second chance points, with 9 of those second chance points coming in the fourth quarter. Like, it's one of those things where I look at it and I'm like, I just don't get why they continue to be this bad at it, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know. I mean, defensive rebounding, it's kind of like, box out. I don't know. Like,
and there's too many times they don't even do that, where you see guys just watching the ball.
Yeah. I mean, and the part that's kind of the part that I struggle with is it's like, okay, what changed versus last year when they were a good defensive rebounding team? Brooke was obviously like always a box out guy. Mm-hmm. Miles, like, it's interesting. I was looking at Miles' numbers. I mean, their defensive rebound rate with Miles, I don't think is like terrible. They're better with him on the floor in terms of defensive rebounding than they are with him on the bench. So I think it's just kind of like, honestly, like a kind of death by 1,000 cuts. They're not defensive rebounding well with Giannis on the floor. Mm-hmm. They're not defensive rebounding well for sure without Bobby Portis. I think there's been a drop off in Bobby's defensive rebounding and activity level. So even though he's shooting the hell out of the ball from three, kind of
Mhm.
everything else just looks like he's kind of older and even slower than he was, which is a problem because it's not like he
Big
was
problem.
doing anything defensively before either, really. So, and I think, putting the bigs aside, the other issue is like, you're just constantly undersized, you're on your wing. They basically have no like true small forwards, right? Like
Mhm.
Kuz is playing a lot of three, and, mostly, and this has been mostly a good Kyle Kuzma season. Like this
It
is his
truly
most
has.
efficient scoring season. But then, you have these games like tonight, which is just a complete no-show. And I think the thing that gives me the most pause with Kuz too is I just don't know how to solve. I think they have a fundamental problem because when they go small to start, I think the issues around, rebounding and, allowing free throws and just getting physically overwhelmed has obviously been a huge problem. Now we've only seen a couple games now with this Kevin Porter Jr. and Ryan Rollins starting together with AJ Green combination. Is that like an unlock that they can better play defense than, when they were starting Gary Trent? Like, I mean, KPJ is like bigger.
Active.
He's bigger, more athletic, but
Mhm.
like, he's not, a 6'7", 220-pound wing who's going to defend big wings. So, again, like, is there a version with him starting with Ryan that makes sense? We'll see, right? I mean, basically the KPJ minutes were very good again tonight, but
Mhm.
KPJ's now played 3 games, 2 against the Wizards, well, 1 and a quarter against the Wizards and 1 against the Nets. So he's basically only played against the worst,
Of the
teams that the
worst
Bucks have
teams.
faced. Of course, the Bucks lost one of those games now. But it will be interesting to see kind of what this looks like playing against more like quote unquote normal teams. But I mean, KPJ, let's not bury the lead. He was fantastic. He's like
Yes,
basically the only guy that
yep.
like doesn't have much culpability in this loss. And unfortunately, when he got hurt in the fourth and had to leave the game, that's when, stuff kind of unraveled. And, Rollins, I think, has basically become much more of an off-ball guy with KPJ. Like, it's very clear which of those two guys is the point guard when they're playing together. Like, Ryan's generally spotting up and KPJ's got the ball. And we can debate whether, it should be more balanced, which you could certainly make an argument given everything we've seen from Rollins. But, like, yeah, I mean, KPJ did what he could. He was a big plus tonight, and everybody else, kind of apparently was just riding KPJ's coattails tonight, which, is not a thing that, we were hoping for. I was always a bit wary of how much like people, when the Bucks were struggling, it was like, well, we've missed Giannis, and like, oh, we haven't had KPJ at all. And it's just sort of like, man, if KPJ is like central to this team, like having any chance of doing anything, it's like, it's not a great place to be. But obviously Cole Anthony has struggled a lot. And, I didn't really understand the first half rotations in the sense that you started Rollins and KPJ, and then you had that run at the start of the second quarter with Cole Anthony, and you immediately saw like an 8-point lead pretty much evaporate. And it's just like, you have to figure out a way to keep one of Rollins or KPJ on the floor at all times, I think. And even if Cole Anthony is out there, like, put Ryan Rollins out there as
With
well, because again, like, turning Ryan into just like a guy standing in the corner, like, is not a good use of his skill set either, although he has been a great spot up shooting guy. So
I did wonder in this game if we saw the more Cole because of Ryan's early foul trouble in this one too, because he picked up
that could be true. Yeah, that could be
really
part of
quick.
it. We didn't see Cole in the second half, but
Yeah.
I thought part of that
Only
was
in that
probably
stint
just,
in the first half.
yeah, I thought maybe that was also just because like basically like second half is like, oh crap, we have to kind of buckle down. But I mean, the crazy part, I mean, they got that big lead in the third quarter, and you thought like, oh, like, maybe this is where they just sort of kind of put this game out of reach. But it's the NBA. I mean, that's just not how the sport works. And again, like, I think this is a team that we've seen it when they take their foot off the gas, especially defensively, especially with the efforts on the defensive glass. They have to gang tackle on the defensive glass. And when they don't do that, they just look like they're standing around, and other guys are just sort of pogo sticking around them, right? I mean, like, it's weird looking at their offensive rebound stats because only 3 guys had offensive rebounds for the Wizards. Bagley had 7. Justin Champagny had 6, and Cam Whitmore had 2. So it's, I don't know what to say, right? And, meanwhile, on the other side, like Miles is 3 for 10, 9 points, 3 rebounds. He was a plus 10, so at least he wasn't on the floor for, some of the bad runs. But, again, like you just obviously need a higher floor from Miles, I think, night to night. And, especially the offensive side of the game has obviously been way more inconsistent than I think anybody would have wanted from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think they got to still figure out ways to try to utilize him best. Like I loved how he was used against Miami, but again, Miami was a smaller team, so they were being very intentional about getting him those post touches and letting him work inside out a little bit more often. But maybe the Bucks just have to find ways to work inside out with Miles Turner more often instead of having him just be more of a spot up 3-point shooter. But the runs that you mentioned, I couldn't believe it. Up 13 points in the third quarter. It was 5:34 left. I wrote this down because I couldn't believe it because the Wizards went on a 21-11 run to end the third quarter. The Wizards outscored the Bucks 33-28 in the third quarter, which is crazy when you think about the Bucks were up by like 15 points at one point in that quarter. And then to end the game, 14-6 run for the Wizards to end the game. Really like a 14-3 because AJ Green hit that last three at the buzzer to end it. But like just disappointing seeing that the Bucks would punch. And then when the Wizards punch back, it was kind of hard for them to keep up. Like that's just not what's expected against the Washington Wizards, who prior to tonight had only won 2 games this season. But that third win came against the Bucks. So I want to talk about if there are answers on roster. Frank, you mentioned something earlier about coaching or roster, and I kind of want to play through that a little bit of like, what we are currently seeing, is this more of a byproduct right now because of roster construction or because of coaching? I want to talk a little bit more about that right after this. This episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks. The holiday season is one of the best time for sports. Bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes, it's all happening at once. And while we're making choices every day, one of the most fun places to make the right call is PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections. Lock in your lineup and you're in the game. It's simple, it's fast, and it's available in 45 states, including Cali, Texas, Florida, and of course, Wisconsin. Creating a lineup takes less than a minute, and the app makes the whole process smooth and intuitive. The early payout feature is a great bonus. When your lineup starts off strong, you may get the option to cash out early. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. This feels like an evergreen question here for us. But before I even get to the question of more of a byproduct where we're seeing from the Bucks of coaching or roster construction, never really gave the Kevin Porter Jr. injury update. Doc Rivers initially said, like, I don't really have too much. It just happened. But when Kevin Porter Jr. was interviewed after the game, he made mention of he feels like it's just kind of his body adjusting to playing an NBA workload, back spasms. He felt pretty confident himself that he'd be available on Wednesday against the Pistons. But we know sometimes players can feel a little bit better about where they are than where the medical staff deems them. But ultimately, it does sound like, hopefully, something that won't keep Kevin Porter Jr. out for a long time, but rather he's just trying to get his body back into shape, because he mentioned that he first felt his back kind of tightening up against the Nets, and it really kind of started to act up there down the stretch against the Wizards. So something to keep an eye on going forward. But Frank, we're about a quarter of the way through the season now. We've talked about the problems that the Bucks continue to face so much this year. And earlier you kind of mentioned, feels like it's a bit coaching and a bit of the roster right now. Do you think it's more one or the other, or do you think it's just kind of like a perfect bad storm in the sense that both of these things aren't being optimized to their full potential?
Well, I mean, let's start with the roster. I think, I think we've talked about it, right? Like you obviously had a decent sample size last year that you could, win with that smaller, kind of featuring heavily kind of like that smaller group. Now they still weren't really starting that until basically the last game of the playoffs, which I think is different, right? I think it's different to play, a small lineup in the flow of a game, being able to pick and choose versus, starting games that way and like having that be like this on the top of the scouting report. But the 3 guard lineup had kind of disastrous results during the season. Like Gary Trent's plus minus is like, I don't know, looks like the national debt at this point. It's just, negative $1 billion. And I was talking with Eric Naaman about this. And like, Eric was kind of pointing out, I was like, look, AJ's looks way better, but AJ's already like, AJ also was the guy that got to stay in the starting lineup when they started playing bigger with like Kuzma, and Giannis and stuff. And so like, maybe that has
skews the numbers,
has made Gary's numbers look especially bad. And so I think you're left in this weird position where it's like, I think to compete defensively, I think definitely your best chance of competing defensively features Kuzma at the 3, because honestly, Kuzma's like the closest you have to like a guy that can just be like the annoying wing type of guy. Now, I was thinking a little recently about like, well, what kind of player, like what's like a non-all-star type of guy that like, would be your ideal addition to this roster. The first thing I thought of was like, well, you definitely need a small forward because you have literally like no true small forwards like left on this roster basically. And so I thought of like a Jalen McDaniels, or I guess Jaden McDaniels. Sorry, Jalen's the worst of the McDaniels brothers. Jaden, the Timberwolves McDaniels. And it's funny because like on good nights, like Kuzma actually does. Maybe he's not as consistent. I mean, look, he's not as consistently defensively great as McDaniels is, but like he kind of like cosplays as like a cosplays as a like reasonable facsimile considering what we all thought Kyle Kuzma was going to be when he got here.
That's fair.
And so there are versions of Kuzma where I think defensively you could look at it and say like, hey, I actually like Kuzma, Rollins, AJ, Kuzma, Giannis, Turner, like that is like a talented enough defensive group and has enough like mixture of size and, ability. Like you should be able to defend with that group. And, last year, like their defense was not bad, as much as it was not great. It was basically average, right? They had basically an average defense. And that was with, Dame. And we've obviously talked a bit about like the lack of flexibility they had, given Brooke really needed to play one style. So I think they're in this spot where I think you have at least like some lineups that you could in theory defend with. And I think again, like that group should not be like a bad defensive rebounding team. And to be clear too, like their defensive rebounding, at least prior to tonight, was like kind of middle of the pack. So it isn't quite as bad as sometimes it feels. Tonight did not help. But I think that at least like I could see this team like cleaning things up a bit there. I also think like they should be better at this fouling stuff. Like this is mostly the same guys you had last year. It's not like Miles Turner is fouling 3-point shooters left and right. Like you should be able to cut out a lot of the fouling because that was a strength last year. They were one of the teams that did well not fouling. It's the same coaching staff. It's mostly the same roster. It's not like Dame was the one bringing them discipline on the perimeter defensively or something like that. So there's got to be a way that, you have, I think, the talent to not be bad defensively. I think the hard part is offensively. I think Kuzma's good when he's being sort of improvisational and getting out in transition and, being opportunistic. I think when you have a half court set and the team is keying on Giannis, I think Kuz being out there, he's shot the 3 ball better kind of recently, but like they are never going to guard him when Giannis has the ball. They don't respect him. So you're in this bad spot, I think, where it's like your ideal version. You have to be very creative, I think, with cutting and Kuzma moving. He wants to occupy some of the same spots that Giannis does. I think you have to be very clever and creative to kind of find that balance and know when to play Kuz with Giannis, when to not play him with Giannis. Obviously he doesn't close that many games, given some of those concerns. And so offensively, you really need like those small guys and those shooters out there with Giannis, because we've seen like when Giannis is out there with shooting, like the stats don't lie. He's like a 125, 126 offensive rating, like, in all of Giannis's minutes. Like it's worked really well. So so I don't worry that much about the offense so much, because like when Giannis is healthy, like they're going to be great when he's on the floor. And then, when he's not off the floor, I think fair to be concerned. But, it does, again, just feel like looking at this team and sort of pivoting it to coaching a bit. I mean, Camille, if I told you before the year, like Kuzma's stat line, and I told you what Ryan Rollins sort of evolved to, and that Ryan Rollins averaged, 18, 5 and 5 or whatever over the first month of the season, and that Giannis was doing Giannis stuff, would you guess that the Bucks would be as bad as they've been?
No, I would have guessed there were a few games over 500 at that point.
Right.
At the very least.
You would guess that they'd be like solid to pretty good.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of like the problem, is just like, once again, even looking at the stats, let alone just the talent, but even looking at the stats, like it's just like the third year in a row where it's a Doc team that you just look at it and be like, wait, you got this guy doing this and this guy doing this. The last 2 years it was like Damian Giannis are like the best two, like most dominant offensive kind of combination in the league, blah, blah, blah. You had like, again, you didn't have necessarily great defensive talent, especially with Dame and, like Chris, when Chris was, still here and things like that. But like, it just always seemed like, again, this team is less than the sum of its parts. And, again, like now you can argue like, well, the parts aren't fantastic. And you're getting even less than less than fantastic. So yeah, I mean, again, it's just like, I just don't think Doc has really, I just don't know that Doc is going to figure out any bright ideas to do that. And I think, I mean, we can kind of coulda, woulda, shoulda around, well, Horst wanted to hire Kenny Atkinson twice, and wasn't able to do it either time. And now you've kind of gotten stuck with Doc. I mean, again, like, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to fire Doc and, make Darvin Ham your head coach the rest of the season? Like, is that going to like do anything?
It doesn't make the team better to uproot the coach in this situation.
I mean, look, I like, does it, you can argue it's just like all just deck chairs on the Titanic regardless, right? Like, is firing Doc like going to really hurt you? Like, probably not, right? I don't think he's like the linchpin of any of this, but it's just this weird situation. It's like Doc seems like a guy that's very good at kind of keeping a locker room together, but he's not very good at getting the most in terms of like results from that locker room on the floor. So you're just sort of like stuck in this, like, again, I'm not going to call Doc like the worst coach in the league or something like that, but like, he's got to be below average in terms of like just getting results. And, you look at just some of the other teams, again, whether it's, what Atkinson did in Cleveland, which not that Cleveland's had a great year this year, but, or JB Bickerstaff, just figuring stuff out with the Pistons, or, what's going on in Phoenix right now with like, like them getting rid of their, former Bucks head coaches, and now like finding some respectability and just some like fresh sort of, energy. So yeah, so I mean, it sucks. This team is like, pretty damn uninspiring right now. And I don't know what, is going on in Giannis's head, but I will come back. My glass, I don't know if it's still half full, Camille, but my glass half full is the thing we always say. The season is long.
Yep.
And by the same token, like we're now over a quarter of the way into the season, which like kind of went by quickly. You've burned a bunch of home games already, and lost a bunch of home games that you would have wanted to win. But, again, if you can right the ship, then there's still I don't know, could you get a 6 seed? Like maybe there's still a version of the world where you could scrape out a 6 seed or something like that. But again, you have to figure out a formula here pretty soon. Yeah. And right now it just feels like they're kind of, throwing darts blindfolded, and, it's not great.
Yeah, they got to figure out the identity and really stick to it. Again, like you mentioned earlier, it's disappointing, especially after having a 7-game losing streak, to come out with the energy and execution that they did in this game against the Wizards. So they got to be better, and they're going to have a test on Wednesday against the Pistons. So we'll wrap up the show here. For that next listen, make sure you check out Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Josh Lloyd has all of the stats, tips, advice, everything that you need to try to win your fantasy league. So for Frank and myself, we'll catch you later.